In the town of Nnobi, there was a new woman. She was very pretty. Everyone looked at her. People talked about her all the time. No one knew where she came from, no one knew her family, and no one knew anything about her past. Her name was Adaora. She was like a secret, she was amazing, and she was very beautiful. Her skin was like the sun, it was very shiny. Her eyes were like stars at night, they sparkled. When she walked, she moved like the wind, she was very graceful. But it wasn't just her beauty that made people look. It was something else. She wore beads around her waist, the beads were special. The beads made a soft sound when she walked. It was a gentle sound. It was a pretty song. The sound made men want things. It made them want her. The song made them think of fun times, and they liked the sound very much. The men in Nnobi couldn't stop talking about her. Who is she? They asked each other. Where did she come from? Why is she here? But nobody knew the answers. No one knew where she lived or her friends. Adaora didn't belong to anyone. She wasn't married. She didn't have a family to help her, and she didn't have any friends to help her either. She was alone. Every day, she went to the market. The market was very busy. In the market, people were buying and selling things. The women were talking, and the children were playing. Adaora walked through the market. Her waist beads made their sound, they went ting, ting, ting as she walked. She moved her body, and she walked very nicely. She was very tall, and she looked like a queen. The men watched her, they looked at her all the time. They wanted her. They wanted to be near her. They wanted to talk to her. They wanted her to look at them, they wanted her to like them. They spent all their money on her. They gave her presents, they gave her gifts, and they gave her everything they had. They gave her gold, and they gave her clothes. Adaora saw everything. She knew what they were doing. She smiled at them, and she looked at them. Sometimes, she talked to them. She let them take her out. She let them take her out to dinner, to parties. She let them give her presents, but she had one rule. She always had one rule. If a man wanted to be with her, he could not touch her waist beads. That was very important. That was the rule. It was a very big rule. Why? The men asked her. They wanted to touch the beads. The beads were shiny and pretty. They wanted to hold the beads in their hands. Adaora smiled. She touched their faces. Her touch was nice. She said, "Because it makes me sweeter." The men really wanted her. They trusted her, they believed her words. One of the men who wanted Adaora was Obina. Obina was a very rich man. He had the most money in the town. He had many things, he was very important. Everyone knew him, and everyone liked him. He was a very powerful man. He was respected by many people. Obina had the biggest shops in town. His shops were full of everything. They had gold, spices, nice clothes, and beautiful things. Everything was perfect. When Obina walked through the market, people moved out of the way. They gave him space. When Obina talked, people listened. They listened to his every word. They did what he said. When Obina spent his money, it was like a river. He gave money to everyone. He helped the town. He was a very good man. But when Obina saw Adaora, everything changed. His money didn't matter anymore. He forgot about his shops, he forgot about his money. He just wanted Adaora, he only wanted to be with her. She walked past his shop. Her waist beads made their song, it was a soft song, a magic song. It called to him. Obina looked at her, he couldn't look away. His heart beat fast, he was very excited. His hands shook. He never shook before. He was always calm, he was always in charge, but not anymore. "I must have her," he whispered. He had to be with Adaora, he had to have her. That was all he wanted. That night, Obina sent her gifts, He sent her the most expensive gifts. He sent gold, gold was very shiny. He sent silk, silk was very soft. He sent perfumes, the perfume smelled wonderful, like flowers. The perfume smelled like the best things in the world. He wanted her to like him. But Adaora sent the gifts back. She didn't want the gifts. She didn't care about the gifts. Obinna was very sad. The next day, he sent more gifts, more things. But she didn't want them. She said no. Again, she said no. She never wanted to take them. Obinna tried so hard. Obinna couldn't eat, he couldn't sleep. He thought about Adaora all the time. He thought about her face, he thought about her smile, he thought about her voice. He thought about her waist beads. He thought about the beads all the time. He thought about the sound. He thought about everything. So, he went to see her. He walked to her house, stood in front of her, and looked at her. Adaora, he said, I will give you anything. Anything you want. Just be mine. Obinna would do anything, he wanted her so much. Adaora tilted her head. She smiled a little. Anything, she asked. Her voice was soft, her voice was like music. Anything, Obinna said. He promised. He wanted her to like him. Adaora took his hand. Her fingers were soft, her touch was soft. Then come with me, she said. Obinna's heart beat very fast. He was very excited. He took her to his big house. His house was very big and nice, he was very proud of his house. They were together that night. They were in his house, under the moonlight. The moonlight was shining on them. It was a beautiful night. Obinna reached for her waist beads. He wanted to touch them, he had to touch them. His fingers touched the beads. The beads were smooth. The beads were cold. The beads had something special. They were not just beads. Take them off, he whispered. His voice was quiet. He wanted to know what was happening, he wanted to understand. Adaora smiled. Her eyes were bright, her eyes glowed in the dark. No, she said softly. It makes me nicer. Obinna loved her, he wanted her. He didn't argue, he didn't say no. He pulled her close, he held her tight. He didn't think about anything else. He just wanted to be with her. He just wanted to hold her, he just wanted her. In the morning, something very bad happened. Obinna's shop caught fire. The fire was very big, and it burned everything. It burned all his money. His money was gone. His house was gone. His wife left him, she took the children with her. Obinna was all alone. He had nothing. He lost everything he loved, everything he had. By the end of the week, Obinna was in the marketplace. He had no clothes, his clothes were ripped. He was dirty. He looked very bad. He asked people for food, he had to beg for food. He was very poor. He had no money, he had nothing to eat. He lost everything. And Adaora. She walked through the market. Her waist beads made their song. The beads went ting, ting, ting. The song still called to the men. The men still watched her. They still wanted her. They didn't know what was going to happen. They didn't know they were in danger. They didn't know about Obinna's bad luck. They didn't know the bad things that were going to happen to them. Even the king wanted Adaora. King Chukwudi was the king of Nnobi. He was a very powerful man. He was the most powerful man in the town. He could do anything he wanted. He was in charge of everything. He could order people around, and he could tell people what to do. He had many warriors, many soldiers. They were all strong, and they would do whatever he said. They would fight for him. He had many wives. They were beautiful, and they loved him. He had lots of money, he was very rich. He lived in a big palace. He was the king. But when King Chukwudi saw Adaora, he forgot everything. He only wanted her. He didn't care about anything else. I must have her, he said. He always got what he wanted, he always had things his own way. He never lost. He was the king. Adaora didn't want the king's gifts. She didn't care about his gifts. She didn't see his messengers, and she didn't talk to them. If the king wants me, he must come here, she said. King Chukwudi was surprised. No one ever said no to him. He was the king. But he wanted Adaora very much. So, King Chukwudi went to see her. He went to the market. This was very strange. The king never went to the market. He was too important. He didn't need to do that. He had people who did things for him. He was the king. He walked through the market. The people were surprised, and they were afraid. They bowed to him. He looked at Adaora, and he went to her. He wanted her to like him, he wanted her. That night, he took her to his palace. His palace was very big and beautiful. It had gold, it had jewels. He was very proud of his palace. He wanted Adaora to see it, he wanted her to be impressed. He lay with her. He was very close to her. He wanted her, and he wanted to touch her. Take them off, he said. He touched her waist beads. He wanted to touch her, and he wanted to hold her. Adaora smiled. No, she said. It makes everything sweeter. She said it in a soft voice. He liked her voice. He wanted her even more. He didn't say anything. He let her do what she wanted. He wanted her to stay. He didn't stop her. He let her keep the beads on. He wanted to be with her. He didn't care about the beads. 7 days later, something bad happened. The king's helpers turned against him. They didn't like him anymore. They were his friends, they worked for him. But now they were his enemies. They turned against him. His best warriors got sick. They couldn't fight. They were weak, they couldn't move. His cows died. His cows were very important. They gave him food, and they gave him money. But now they were dead, they were all gone. His treasure was gone. His jewels and gold disappeared. He couldn't find them. He had lost everything. The people of Nnobi were angry, they were afraid. They thought the gods didn't like the king anymore. They thought the gods were mad at him. They said the king had done something wrong. They said the king was bad. On the 7th night, the people came to the palace. They had torches. They were angry. They wanted to hurt the king. King Chukwudi must go, they shouted. The king ran away. He was scared. He left his crown. The crown was very important. It meant he was king. But he ran away. Adaora was still walking through the market. She was still there. Her waist beads were still making their sound. Another man had lost everything because of her. Another man was sad. Then a man named Ekene came. He was different from the other men. He wasn't scared, he wasn't shy, and he wasn't afraid. When Ekene saw Adaora, he didn't run after her. He didn't try to impress her. He didn't give her gifts. He didn't spend his money on her. He watched her. He looked at her. He was careful. He waited. He watched the other men. He saw what they did. He saw them lose everything. They lost their money, they lost their homes, and they lost everything. They made themselves sad. Ekene was smart. He was clever. He saw the pattern. He saw what was going to happen. He saw the mistakes. He saw how Adaora had them. He knew that the men were making mistakes. He knew how to stop her, he knew what was going to happen. He had to be smart. When he was ready, he went to her. He walked up to her in the marketplace. He didn't run, he didn't rush, he wasn't excited. He just looked at her. He was calm. He just said, I want you. He said it simply. He spoke clearly. Adaora smiled. Then have me, she said. Her voice was nice. She wanted to trick him, she wanted to catch him. That night, Ekene brought Adaora to his house. His house was not big. It was a small house. It was a simple house. He wasn't rich, but his house was clean and neat. He reached for her waist beads. He touched them. He looked at them. He didn't smile. He was calm. He was ready to get her. He didn't rush. He didn't want to make her fall in love with him. He didn't want to give her gifts. He didn't want to make her happy. Take them off, he said. Adaora's smile disappeared. She stopped smiling. She was not happy. She was scared. Ekene looked at her. He didn't smile. He was not happy. He saw her face. He saw she was afraid. He knew she was hiding something. He knew she was not telling the truth. He knew that her waist beads were very important. The other men had fallen for her lies. They did what she said. They trusted her. They gave her everything. She took everything. She had them. Ekene saw through her trick. He would not make the same mistake. I don't want you if you don't take them off, he said. His voice was strong. His voice was sure. He was not going to change his mind. He would not do anything else. She was worried. She didn't know what to do. Adaora felt something new. She had never felt this way before. She was scared. She did not like this. She was very worried. She was in danger. She had tricked so many men before. But Ekene was different. He was too smart. He wouldn't make a mistake. She had to stop him. She didn't know how. Before she could do anything, Ekene grabbed her wrist. He grabbed her hard. He pulled the waist beads off. A loud scream came out. The scream was terrible. It was scary. Adaora fell to the ground. She held her stomach. Her face changed. Her body started to change. It was a bad change. It was a terrible change. Her skin began to burn. It changed colors. Her beauty was gone. She was no longer pretty. She was no longer beautiful. She was not the woman they knew. She was a monster. She ran away. She ran through the streets. She was screaming. The people saw her. They were afraid. She was not beautiful anymore. She was a monster. The beads made her beautiful. But now the beads were gone. The people of Nnobi knew the truth. Adaora was not a good person. She was a curse. Her power was gone. The beads were gone. She was gone.